Sometimes the best stories in golf aren't found on tour. You'll find them at the back of the range. And here's your host, Ben Adelberg.
Thank you again for joining me here at the back of the range. I am your host, Ben Adelberg. This is episode 29. This week, we resume our conversation with Ryan Howison. Ryan played professionally on the Web.com Tour and the PGA Tour. After an outstanding 1999 season on the Web, Ryan went back to the PGA Tour during Tiger Woods' era of dominance. If you didn't catch the first part of our conversation, go check out episode 24. Ryan shared with us his start in the game, which was incredibly unique. He was a college baseball player at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, didn't play college golf. Anyway, it's a fascinating listen. Go check out episode 24. Actually, if you want to learn more about our podcast and listen to all of the previous episodes, head over to thebackoftherange.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you'll find that information in the show notes of this podcast. So let's get back to Ryan Howison here at the back of the range. Before we talk about your second stint on the PGA Tour in 2000, what was one of the big differences that you saw? I'm sure there were a lot, but what was one of the big differences that immediately hit you when you jumped down from PGA to the Web?
Well, and there's the obvious differences, and you were playing for a whole lot less money.
Is the level of competition different? Did you see something that really jumped out at you when you went to that tour, or was it guys that were just as good enough to be on the PGA Tour that were working their way back?
What I think I noticed the most was the top 30 to 40 players in the world were just so much better than everybody else. The Ernie Els and the Normans and the Faldos and people like that. They were just heads and shoulders above everybody else. But then when you got down further than that, there was times when guys would play phenomenal, but then there would also be times when they would play very mediocre. And on the Web.com Tour, the guys who would play great were never as great as the top 30 players in the world that you had seen. But they were extremely talented. But then a lot of the other ones, and I would probably throw myself in many years into this category, were still trying to find their way, still working on their game, trying to get to the next level. Versus the PGA Tour, you're at the ultimate level. So now it's time to perform. On the Web.com, you're sort of still in that trial mode. You know, if I tweak my swing here, can I get up to the PGA Tour? If I work on this, or if I work out more, if I change my diet, can I get to the PGA Tour? So they were working towards getting better, versus the PGA Tour was more working about getting it done.
Right.
So I noticed that. So when I went back to the tours, I focused more on getting it done. So I was on the PGA Tour, I was trying to get a lot better. But when I went back to the Web, I would try to get better. But when it was game time, I said, whatever I have, I've got to play with. I'm gonna stop trying to work on my swing while I'm playing, versus I need to pay bills and I need to try to get back out. Because once you've had a taste of it, you certainly want to get back, because you're treated like royalty when you have no reason to be treated that way. They definitely treat you far better. They treated me far better than I deserved to be treated.
So you make your way back onto the tour. I'm assuming because it was more of a battlefield promotion with having the 2 wins in '99. So you finished up on the money list in '99. You're back on the tour in 2000. So you're there before Tiger, and you get back basically at his, I mean, we can argue about what the height of Tiger Woods is, but it's the year 2000. So he's got a couple majors, 97 Masters has already happened. What did you see different on the tour in 2000 that you saw in 95?
There was a lot more excitement going on, especially events that Tiger would play in. And I would always, if I had a tee time at any place close to Tiger's, which generally was not on the weekends. So if I happen to, you know, many times I'd have a late tee time on Thursday or Friday, which is not the ideal tee time. You'd rather tee off sort of, early to mid of the two different waves. That's where the champions played. So if Tiger was teeing off at, 8:00 and I was teeing off at 9:10, I would try to get to the range early, and I'd ask my caddy, I said, put my bag as close to Tiger's as you can get, because I wanted to watch in person what he was doing. And part of that was demoralizing, because I remember at Disney one year.
Kind of a masochist, aren't you? You just really.
Yeah, well, a little bit. You're exactly right. So, but I wanted to see it. He was making history. So I remember he was on 5-iron when I got to my bag, but I'm taking mental note. I'm not watching him hit every shot, but I'm watching him hit enough. I'm taking mental note of his trajectory, the height, and where the ball was landing. So, and I'm loosening up in my sandwich like, most every pro does. And, then Tiger goes through the rest of his bag, his 3-wood and his driver, and goes back down. Then he leaves and he goes and tees off. So as I get to my 5-iron, I'm hitting half as high and 3/4 the way as far. Now, when I got to my driver, I'm not even getting close to where his 3-wood was going, let alone the height. And I'm thinking to or the consistency for that matter. Tiger's landing a 3-wood within, a 10-yard area of 5 or 6 swings. And I'm kind of, one's high, one's low, one's right, one's left. And I'm thinking to myself, Tiger used to talk about having his A game. I remember thinking I could have my A game and still lose by 15 to this guy. So, but it was great to be playing in that, I hate to call it an era, but yeah, I agree. 2000 when Tiger was, in my opinion, at his ultimate height. You just couldn't beat him. He was playing great. He was making every putt, so much so that I called Scotty Cameron after watching Tiger make a boatload of putts and asked him, can you send me Tiger's putter? Because his was a little bit different. Tiger's actually back using that putter now after playing a Nike putter for a long time. So I have one of the ones that he had made. His says Tiger Woods and mine doesn't, but outside of that, it's the same putter. His has won 13 majors and mine hasn't played in a major. But besides that, we're exactly the same.
Yeah, it's.
But he just did everything so phenomenally. It was great, and being out there in the atmosphere, even the weeks he wasn't playing, everybody was trying to find a way to beat Tiger. So the guys who were really confident back when I was out there in '95 didn't seem quite as confident in 2000 because there's that new sheriff in town who was beating everybody, and handedly, by the way.
Wow.
So
when I was researching, when I was preparing for our episode, and I was just looking at the, your stint basically before Tiger and after Tiger, that was one of the first things I was like, gosh, I really have to ask you about that, because I could have just imagined it had to be just night and day, just not even, the money, the crowds, the juice and the action around. I can just imagine just a completely different animal.
It was, and excitement is the best word I can say to express it. I never thought, oh gosh, I'm playing for second, because I wasn't playing for first to begin with. So I actually enjoyed it. I became a fan of his ability. I had a brief conversation with him once or twice, but I never got to know him. So I couldn't tell you from a person what he was like, but I'll tell you what, from a golfer, I was a huge, and still am a huge fan of his, for what he's done for the game, what he's done for the fitness, how the athletes that he's brought into the game, and just for the overall health worldwide of the game. I imagine Arnold Palmer had the same effect, or I give Arnold a tremendous amount of respect, and I think Tiger is sort of in that same role.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask you, but and I would agree that gosh, it's just hard to compare the impact that Palmer had. Palmer brought golf to TV, but I think Tiger, gosh, yeah, I don't think we're going to fully grasp what Tiger brought to the game for another 10 years. I mean, it's massive now, but I think when Tiger is gone from playing competitively, that's what's really going to hit everyone. Like, wow, what this guy did. There's guys out there that have no idea what he did in 2000 because they were 6 years old. So, so you play in 2000, and then you go back to Nationwide. So, how many events did you play in 2000?
Can't remember at this point. Sort of maybe mid-20s.
Okay.
So I played a lot more, but still didn't keep my card. And good thing I had sponsors for equipment and logos and things like that. So I always said you made a profit on the PGA Tour, even if you didn't really play well because you had outside sponsors. That was never the case on the web.com tour. The sponsorships were far less, and you had to play well to actually make money. So, but I was never able to keep my card by playing out there. So I fell back, and then I had a few injuries over the next few years, and actually missed most of 2005 with a surgery. And then I started thinking about, at what point now is it time to hang it up? I was getting older. I started thinking, I feel like I've plateaued. So I'm not getting any better. And now, because of the Tiger effect, everybody else is.
Right.
Everyone's hitting it further. I remember, back in my day, somebody who drove at 290 was leading the tour. And then all of a sudden the average is 290. And I was hitting the exact same distance back then and when I stopped playing. So I didn't accelerate. I was sort of treading water. But I didn't want to, in hindsight, if I was thinking about things, I might have stopped playing a couple of years before I did. But it's so hard to get out on either of the two tours. Because I had wins on the web.com tour, I had status through 2008. And I kept telling myself, I would hear my grandfather, Jack, in the back of my head saying, avoid the what ifs. So I didn't want to go into business and do what I'm doing today and think, gosh, you had another year or two of status. Never know what could have happened. Maybe you should have kept trying. And so I just decided, what, I'm going to postpone the next career and I'm going to keep trying. And at least now now that I'm not playing, I look back and said, I gave it everything I had, both effort wise, but also time wise. And it just, I got as far as I was going to go. And at the time you don't realize that, it was a decent career. But now I look back and think, there wasn't a lot of, guys or golfers in the world that had the opportunity to play in one PGA Tour event, let alone be out there for a few years. And the people that I met and the experiences that I have, and even today, when the Honda Golf Tournament comes down here to PGA National in Palm Beach Gardens, I still go out and I'll walk, the range, and I still talk to the tour reps and some of the caddies and a few of the players. And it's kind of like it's still a fraternity, just like baseball was back in college. It's a fraternity because there hasn't been, tens of thousands of guys who have played on the PGA Tour for multiple years. So I had 14 years between the two tours. That's meeting a lot of guys, spending a lot of time week in and week out. And I'm glad to say that I still have a lot of great relationships with those guys. And many of them I only keep in touch with that 1 week out of the year, but it's great to see them and catch up with them.
Absolutely. Well, just hearing your story of how you got started, you have to feel that you just overachieved and you just got to experience so much just I mean, gosh, you spent 14 years between the PGA Tour and the web. Um, I'm going to ask you something that's kind of unique that I don't get to ask very often. We all see these PGA Tour players and web players with all these sponsorships. They have club deals and shoe deals and clothing deals. And how does that happen? Can you explain to me how that whole process occurs to the point of all of a sudden you're playing on the web, you're wearing whatever, and then all of a sudden now you're on the PGA Tour, and I know you were sponsored by Kent Golf. I'm sure you had other deals, but can you just explain to our listeners that may not understand how that whole thing works, what the process is of getting a sponsor, and now you're wearing their clothes or you're playing their clubs?
Absolutely. Part of it depends on whether you have an agent who is willing to work with you when you're a no name. Because, like any business, there's time commitments that they have, and, they have to generate revenue, and they get a portion of the revenue that they generate for you. But I was very fortunate to have an agent who helped me out and made me some introductions. On the web.com, there's not a lot of solicitations going on of people wanting to sponsor you. But some of them, club manufacturers, a Titleist, people like that, they would have a standard ball, shoe, glove deal. So maybe, I'm just throwing out numbers. I don't know what today's numbers are. I can tell you when I started out, which obviously was eons ago. I remember it was $5,000 or $10,000 for the year if you played the ball, wore FootJoy shoes, and wore a Titleist glove. Well, for most of us, that was a no-brainer because we were going to do that anyways. And the fact that they're giving you the equipment and paying you was sort of just,
yeah,
kind of, I was going to play a Titleist. I'm going to use a Titleist glove. I like FootJoy shoes, and you're giving them to me for free and writing me a check. Yeah, I'll sign up for that. But there weren't a lot of outside deals on the web.com tour. There may be today, but in my day there wasn't. On the PGA Tour, it's a different story. Because they know there's a bigger chance that you're going to be seen by somebody, even if you're not a marquee player, because there's just more people going to tournaments. And because of that, they tend to value your logo being seen. So I would find internet companies who would say, listen, would love to put a logo on your sleeve. And usually is from some type of personal interaction. I always loved playing in pro-ams. I wanted the guys or gals to enjoy themselves. And I made some good contacts. And then as I made, my game progressed, they would come to me and say, hey, we'd be willing to put something on your sleeve, and we'll give you $25,000 for the year to do it. And so, I had a belt company that did the same thing. So next thing you know, you got two sleeves, you got $50,000 in that. The ball shoe glove deal was now much higher. And then you could throw in an equipment deal. And then back then, they'd also pay you X amount a week to use a driver. So because we have this thing called the Darrell Survey, which is where they go through everybody's bag before the first round, and they write down what you're using. So that, that's why somebody like Titleist can say, 120 out of 144 guys
right.
used, Titleist ball for the week. I'm just making up numbers. But if you used a driver, they may pay you $500 to $1,000 just to use that driver that 1 week. So you would find, endorsements like that or benefits like that. The pro-ams, which I liked playing in anyways, would pay you a lot more. On the web.com, maybe they pay you $100 to play in a pro-am. On the PGA Tour, it was $1,000. And I'm thinking, I have to play a practice round anyways. I'm going to play in a pro-am, or you're going to allow me to ride in a cart versus walk, which saves wear and tear on me and my caddy. and you're going to give me $1,000. Well, this is a no-brainer.
And it puts you in front of business people that could potentially help you further down the road. I mean, you're getting paid to basically network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I would love to go back and do it all over again, because some of the business people that I played with, now I own a financial advisory practice, and I have clients who are people that I've played golf with. Some of my biggest clients were people that I met while I was still a professional golfer.
Sure.
So, I would love to go back and talk to some of those people. And, and on that note, I always found it very interesting where people will always say how nervous they get at golf. And I say, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. Everybody gets nervous playing golf. And I can remember CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who are in front of boardrooms and on TV all the time, watching them tee up that first ball on the first tee and watching their hand shake. And you're thinking, this person handles billions of dollars every day, and they're nervous on the golf course. So,
kind of
everyone gets nervous.
Puts things in perspective for you when you're doing it. I remember in '95, Corey Pavin won the U.S. Open at Shinnecock, and I know exactly where I was. I was out in Colorado for the summer with my aunt and uncle, and I just remember him winning that. And then I think it was shortly thereafter, I know he was with Cleveland, and I'm sure you remember the irons I'm about to mention, the Cleveland VAS irons, right?
Yep.
Okay. And he went to those, and, I mean, Pavin was just such a purist. I mean, I think on the senior tour now he still has a bullseye putter, and he switched to those. And, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast and just Google Cleveland VAS irons, and you'll see that what I'm talking about.
Yeah, ugliest things you've ever seen.
Ugliest thing you've ever seen. Purple badge on the back cavity, and the I really can't describe.
The hosel was terrible.
I can't describe the club. It's awful. Go Google it. I'll put a link in the show notes of this episode so you can see a Google image of it. But my roundabout way of getting to this question is, how often did you see players switching to equipment that you knew it was just a money grab?
Fairly often, myself included.
Okay.
So when I first got my PGA Tour card, and I knew I wasn't getting into golf tournaments, and I had been using I believe a Titleist golf ball, and Top Flight, who had a ball called a Z Bellata, which was,
I remember,
everyone thinks a Top Flight is just this rock hard golf ball, but they actually had a tour quality golf ball, and they came to me and offered me $30,000 if I played it for the year. Now, you're talking to somebody who's shocked they're even on the PGA Tour, who biggest paycheck they ever made and thought it was a huge sum of money was $12,000 for winning a tournament, and now is not getting into tournaments, even though I still have bills, and somebody comes and waves $30,000 just to play a golf ball. I jumped all over. I'd never even hit the ball. I had them send me some. I was like, okay, this sounds great. In hindsight, what a silly idea that was. I mean, probably the most important piece of equipment that you have is your golf ball. It's the only thing that, people care where it goes. And I'm changing the golf ball to make money. But at that point, I felt like it was the right idea. To answer your question, I saw it a fair amount. You'd see guys switch to different equipment. Nike in recent times, Nike was making equipment. Now, a lot of the equipment that manufacturers made that they sold on the shelves was not what the tour players were actually using. And I don't think that's any surprise to anybody.
Right.
But a lot of guys who signed with Nike, these very lucrative, tried to fit the equipment to them instead of going out and finding the equipment that worked for them. So, and I can't say everybody did, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it seemed to me that guys who struggled after changing equipment, they didn't switch to it because they said, you know what, this is great equipment, and let's see if they'll sign me. It felt to me, and I didn't have firsthand knowledge, but it felt to me of, oh, you're going to offer me this, So I'll find a way to play it, very much like I did with that golf tool.
Sure. Well, and yeah, I'm not asking you to put anyone else's, to mention anyone by name, but just by you, basically confirming my question, I would have to go out on a limb and say you're not the only one that's done that. So there you go. So you play, you kind of come to the end of it around 07, 08 on the nationwide tour. Before you transitioned into your career now, which is a financial advisor, you actually had a stint in my profession, and boy, that's sarcasm. But anyway, you were in the golf media. You worked for Golf Channel. You did some on-course reporting for them. How did that come about? Especially since at that time it was not the juggernaut that the Golf Channel is now. How did that come about?
It was interesting. I was playing in some, what's now the web.com tour events. Jerry Foltz, who is still with the Golf Channel, had stopped playing to become a full-time golf announcer. And I happened to meet some of the producers of the Keith Hirschland was the producer's name. And for some reason, he thought I might be decent at announcing. So he asked me one tournament when I had a morning Thursday tee time. He said, when you get done playing, would you like to try doing some announcing? I think they were one announcer short for the week, and I can't remember why. And I said, sure. So I get done. I sign my scorecard after 18 holes. They take me to the equipment truck. They strap on this power pack with a microphone, and they send me out on a golf cart out to the hole. And then they would just start speaking to you, as you know, being in the business. They speak in your headset and they say, Ryan, we're going to come to you in a minute. We're going to show such and such shot, and basically tell us what you think the golfer is facing or what they're thinking or something like that. And so I did, and I seemingly thought it was a lot of fun. And apparently I did it okay because they kept asking me to do it over and over again for a few years. Primarily events that I was already playing in. So, which was good for them because they didn't have to pay my travel expenses. They had put me up in a hotel and things like that. So I was fairly cheap labor. They would pay me a daily rate. And what I loved about it was all you were doing is saying what you would have been thinking as a golfer. So you're thinking about the lie, you're thinking about the shot, you're thinking about the hazard, where you want to put it, what the wind's going to be doing, things like that. And you would just articulate it in a microphone. The tough part about it, and anyone who's done this, is you have people chatting in your ear while you're talking, and you're trying to listen to them at the same time of continuing to speak as if, nobody's talking to you. And that took a little bit of getting used to, but I used to love doing it. And then they invited me to do a couple of PGA Tour events where I wasn't playing in because I wasn't on the tour at that point. And I really enjoyed doing that. And then I did at least one Q school that I hadn't made it to the finals on. So I had a great time doing the announcing. I thought it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Part of it is they can make you look great. I used to tell people all the time. I remember walking into a locker room one time after I just finished. I think Jason Gore came up to me and he said, "Man, you called that shot on 15 awesome." And he spun it back off the ridge. And what had happened? Somebody had, before they hit the shot, before they saw them hit the shot, I said, the ideal shot is you hit a little bit left of the hole, you use the ridge, you spin it back to the hole. He goes, "Man, it was awesome that you called it." And that's exactly what happened. I said, "Jason, that shot had happened like 2 minutes before I called it." So they had taped it and they said, "Okay, now Ryan, I want you to call the shot you just saw as if it just happened live." So you could make yourself look like a genius,
right?
Because you had already seen the shot happen. So I would get a big kick out of that.
This is perfect. You're just like you're coming from, or you're showing us behind the curtain. So basically, there's a lot of times when you're out there calling these shots, you already know what's happening. Yeah, you're giving our listeners a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here of the Golf Channel and golf broadcasts all over the world. So perfect. So you, and again, just to kind of, go back to how you, I guess, got into golf a little bit. I mean, I don't want to say backwards, but you really didn't have the amateur career to lead you into the pro ranks. You started basically as a pro, and now you got your amateur status back and you're playing amateur golf again. So you, if I remember correctly, you just got into your first USGA amateur event. Was it last year at the US Mid-Am?
I did last summer. So when I decided to stop playing golf, I didn't think about playing any types of tournaments. So there went several years where I didn't do anything. And then somebody invited me to play in a member guest up north. And it was as a member guest I really wanted to play in. And then they called me a few weeks ahead of it and said, you know what, they just found out that you're still technically a professional, and they sort of frown on professionals playing. And I thought to myself, well, that kind of stinks because I haven't played a professional event in 5 years.
Sure.
So, or 4 years, whatever it was at that time. And I said, you know what? I want to play in these fun events. Golf is no longer all about competition. It's about the camaraderie and having a good time and good experiences and playing a lot of these great venues throughout the country and meeting great people. I said, so there's no point in me having professional status anymore. I'm not playing as a professional. So I applied for my amateur status back. It took years to get it back. And then in May of 2014, I was granted my amateur status, which has been a lot of fun because I can now play in, local county events, which we have a great, section here, county section of events with great players. I play in member guests all over the country, playing some extremely nice golf courses, and just have had a great time doing it. You get a little taste of competition, but you also get the sort of relaxed social aspect of if you make a double bogey, who really cares?
Exactly. So did you have any of the same kind of nervousness or apprehension about playing at that stage? Or was this just pretty much comfort level, back at it again? I'll just kind of, fall back on my experiences playing professionally.
Yeah, I would definitely the latter. So I was more excited to have qualified for it because, it's kind of one of those you check off. I had not played a USGA event, as neither a junior nor as a professional. So I wanted to play in one. So qualifying last year to get into it was sort of the goal. Going to play in it was sort of just, now I'm just going to have a good time.
Sure.
So I had a good college baseball teammate of mine who lived in Atlanta. He came and he caddied for me. It was a golf course, 2 golf courses. One of them, the primary course, way too long for me. When you hit it 250, 260 off the tee and you're playing with 25 to 30 year olds who are hitting it, 300, I'm back to using the excuses, but the excuses, I'm just not built for playing a 7,200 yard par 70. So, I'd be better off at 6,200 yards.
Sure.
So, but it was a great experience. It was fun. I had a good time. And I'm glad that I was able to do it. I've got a nice little tea gift for being there. So something to remember.
Yeah. And I've interviewed people for the podcast in the, previously that are professionals that have gotten their amateur status back. Our first episode, actually, Steve Anderson, who's out of Hobe Sound, Florida, and he's an Ohio guy as well, and he played professionally and has played in a lot of USGA events. What is your opinion of professionals that get their amateur status back? I mean, there's a certain level of, giving it a shot on the mini tours as opposed to playing on the PGA Tour or playing on the mini tours. Do you have any sort of an opinion of pros that get their status back?
I think it depends on what the motivation for getting your amateur status back is. So for me, it was more to play in member guests and enjoy meeting people and playing with members and playing with clients and and playing some of these great golf courses, around the country that maybe otherwise I would not have the opportunity.
Sure.
The guys who get their amateur status back, and I can't say that I know any that did this, but I think the persona is the people that get their amateur status back so that they can then go and play in amateur tournaments and have a better chance of winning. I'm not a fan of that. So, I played in my, the USGA event, which the Mid-Am, which is anyone over the age of 25 who's an amateur. I was 51.
Right.
So, I didn't have any kind of misconceptions that I had a chance of going and winning. I mean, obviously you want to think you do, but I was a realist.
Right.
I didn't get my amateur status back so that I could go try to win golf tournaments. When I'm playing in member guest, somebody can say, well, are you still playing in member guest? Well, it's handicapped. I carry a handicap. So I'm not really, there's no advantage whether I'm a pro or I'm an amateur. I'm still at the same handicap.
You're just getting the status back so you can actually go sign up and join your friends and play these things. It doesn't matter if you're right. Yeah.
Exactly. So a little different than if you're, playing every day and then you say, I want to go play in the USAM or, do something like that and have a chance to win, because basically you're still a professional and you've just deemed yourself an amateur. And like I said, I don't know that anyone has done that, but I could see where people would frown upon that.
Sure.
I did it just, quite frankly, because I didn't like being ousted from a member guest when because I was a professional, even though I wasn't.
You weren't playing
professional events in years.
Right. Well, you've been very gracious with your time. I have just a couple quick questions here. We have a segment here at the back of the range called the Quick Bucket. These are just rapid questions, so we'll get you out of here pretty quickly. Tiger winning a green jacket versus Jack winning his 6th green jacket in 1986. Which would be the bigger, more substantial victory in your mind?
Well, I'm a huge Nicklaus fan. I will always side with Jack when it comes to something like that. And one of the reasons that, any of us that live in Palm Beach County, he is so gracious with his time and energies and everybody has gotten the chance to get to know him around here and the family. So you definitely pull for, Jack, and I would say winning it at age 46 when he hasn't really done much in a few years versus, Tiger winning at 40, what, he'd be 42 next year.
Yep.
Or 43.
43, yeah.
And he's won a major, I guess, 4 years ago. I would still have to say, that Jack, I think he was 1980 and then 1986.
That's
so I think
correct.
Tiger won and what was Tiger's last one? Or has it been?
No, Tiger's been 10 years. It was 2008.
Yeah, it was 2008. So, I take that back. Being a Nicklaus fan my whole life and, obviously Jack being from the Columbus, Ohio area, I tend to knee-jerk reaction side with Jack, but I think that if Tiger's win would do more for the game of golf because of what he's done for golf in his generation. So this past Masters, nobody was pulling harder for him than I was.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially after the Bay Hill performance and just seeing what he was doing and hearing how well he played in his practice rounds and things like that. I was really excited to watch, and I'm not a big TV watcher of golf anymore, but when Tiger plays and he's playing well, I watch.
The other question I have for you is, so you have this baseball background. Any superstitions? Baseball players are very superstitious. Any superstitions that you had while you were playing?
I always said it's bad luck to be superstitious.
Okay.
So no, I actually didn't have a lot. Well, I guess I take that back. I used to only mark my golf ball with a coin that had a number in the 60s, so
Okay.
1968, 69, something like that. I would only mark it heads up. Trying to think of some other things. We all have little things where if we stretch a certain way one day or we eat a certain breakfast one day, when we play well, we'll do it again. You kind of ride the horse until it doesn't work anymore.
Of course.
I see a lot of superstitions when even watching on TV, guys doing different things and stuff like that. And I always think it's interesting and it's fun. And, if it helps you play better, golf is so much, as we know, between the years, that if anything gives you that little edge or makes you a little more comfortable or a little more confident, then that's what you're going to do.
Are there things, now you just mentioned this, that just kind of spawned this question. Are there things that you see when you're watching coverage as a former PGA Tour player that most viewers may not recognize that you're seeing, like, wow, this guy's nervous, or wow, this guy is really kind of losing it? Are there different things, triggers that you're kind of picking up?
I think and I don't know if I see them or other people don't, but you can see a lot of facial expressions. I could see recently, I forget where it was, I could see Phil getting nervous. And it wasn't the tournament he won. I can't think if it was the Masters or something else. And I can gosh, I've never seen Phil nervous.
It must have been Houston because he won it.
Yeah, it was Houston.
Okay.
So I think maybe things like that. You can see somebody's swing get a fraction shorter or a fraction quicker when they're changing things. The people that really impress me are the people that can really just grind it out. I thought, and Ian Poulter, who I practiced with out at in Carlsbad long time ago, and got to know just very briefly, and wouldn't say that I'm a huge Ian Poulter fan, but his performance in Houston was to come down the last hole, which I think is about all I watched of after a while, and he pipes it down the middle when he's one back. He hits it on the green, and then he drains this 35-footer or whatever to get into a playoff, and comes out in the playoff and does the exact same thing. I thought, you know what? He just manned up right there.
Yeah.
And because I've been in that position, I think I appreciate what he's done maybe more so than other people, because I can feel there's no way you can't be nervous. So I always tell amateurs, or used to tell amateurs, people will say, how do you go from the range where you're not nervous to the course where you're, how do you stop being nervous? Well, it's impossible. You can't. I mean, Tiger used to say, even in his heyday, he got really, really nervous. It's a human emotion. You can't not get nervous, but you can find ways to overcome being nervous. And knowing that there's no way that Ian Poulter is not nervous when he knows he has to win for a multitude of reasons. Well, one really big one is to get in the Masters starting the next day.
Yeah.
And he's able to pull off those shots in the last, on 18, playing it 2 consecutive times. I thought to myself, I'm not a huge Ian Poulter fan, but I am a huge fan of what he just did.
Well, I'm trying to let you go, but you keep coming back with all these great stories. And I just remembered before we started recording this, you had a Jim Furyk story you had to tell. So give me your Furyk story.
So Jim, really nice guy. And I remember, actually, I'll tell you two quick stories, sort of feel good stories.
Yeah.
Jim was a really nice guy. And I remember when one of the times, I think in 95, or I can't remember what year it was. Anyways, I was playing in Hawaii, and he came up, and we had played sometime, a long time before that, I think before he got on the PGA Tour, and he just treated me like we'd known each other forever. And I really, don't remember anything about that. us playing previously. So I thought it was really nice. And then he and I played, I think, later that year at a practice round in Chicago at the Western Open. And we played 9 holes. And when I tell you that if we kept score for the 9 holes, he did not break 50, I'm probably underestimating. I have never seen a professional hit it this badly on the golf course. And I thought, we all know he's got a crazy golf swing, but he was a great player. And I'm thinking to myself, this is like almost embarrassing. And he goes on and he misses the cut. He went out and played the very next week and won. And I thought to myself, how is that possible? I would have given this guy 5 shots aside last week, and he just won the PGA Tour event the very next week. How can you change your game that quickly? And 2, how can you believe in yourself that much to not think of all those shots you just hit the week before that were they weren't just bad, they were embarrassing. And I just thought, man, his mental fortitude has got to be off the charts. And obviously we know he was a good player then. He's turned into just one of the all-time great players. The other thing was, I remember a quick story about Stuart Sink. So in 1995, I'm playing a Pro-Am up at Hartford. And we got to the 15th hole, which is a drivable par 4. And there was a wait. And Stuart is playing in front of me. And he had just graduated college not too long ago. And he was given a sponsor's exemption. And this was his first PGA Tour event he was playing in. So I didn't follow amateur golf, so I didn't really know who he was. But I walked up and he said, he introduced himself and said, "How you doing?" He said, "This is my first event." I said, "Well, hey, welcome to the tour, blah, blah, blah." We're just chit-chatting. Didn't think anything of it. 5 years later, we're on the range at the Bob Hope out in the desert. And I'm on the range, and Stuart comes walking down, and he puts his bag down. And all of a sudden, he sees me. He comes walking down 3 or 4 different spots. And he comes up to me. He said, "Ryan," he said, I'm glad you get back on tour. He said, "You were the first guy ever to welcome me to the PGA Tour. So let me be the first one to welcome you back." That's awesome. I really thought that was, obviously I remember it to this day. It just was one of those things where, he was nobody at that time. He was a great college player. But then in that 5 years, he became, a really outstanding PGA Tour player. And for him to take the time and to remember that and come up and say that to me, I'm sure he's long forgotten that he ever did that, but I'll never forget.
Yeah. No,
that just kind of shows some of the quality of, the guys out there. They're obviously great players and incredible athletes, and the amount of charity work that they all do. But there's some really great guys out there.
Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here. I just phenomenal stories, phenomenal insight into not just making it onto the PGA Tour, but the experiences in and around the tour, and just the track that your life has taken in your career on the golf course. And I know we're going to be playing some Palm Beach County amateur events, and hope to see you on the course very soon.
Ben, I appreciate you having me. I hope you give me some strokes when we see each other.
Okay, well, let's not get crazy, but Ryan, I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ben.
And there you have it. Another great episode here at the Back of the Range. Special thanks to Ryan Howison for all of his time. Don't worry, we'll be back next week for another episode here at the Back of the Range.